Part 1. The spaceship touched down on the landing platform with barely a whisper. Jake Peterson stood up from his seat and stretched his arms over his head. The journey from Earth had taken 3 weeks, even with the new faster-than-light engines that humanity had only recently figured out how to build. Beside him, Amy Brooks was already gathering her bags, her face showing the same mix of excitement and curiosity that Jake felt. They were the first humans ever invited to attend the Interstellar Collective's Survival Training Academy. It was supposed to be an honor. The letter from the collective had used words like prestigious and elite and highly selective. Jake had served 10 years in the military, including 2 tours in some of the harshest places on Earth. Amy had even more experience, with wilderness survival training in places most people had never heard of. They both figured they were qualified enough. The door of the ship opened and warm air rushed in. Jake stepped out onto the platform and looked around. The planet Sinara 7 was beautiful. 2 suns hung in a purple sky, casting everything in a soft golden light. The buildings were made of something that looked like crystal, and they sparkled in the sunlight. Everything looked clean and organized and peaceful. A group of aliens was waiting for them at the edge of the platform. Jake counted about 6 of them, all different species. The one in front was tall and thin, with silvery skin that seemed to shimmer when he moved. He had 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern on his face, and they all blinked at different times. When he walked forward to greet them, his movements were smooth and graceful. "Welcome to the Survival Training Academy," the alien said. His mouth didn't move quite right with the words, and Jake realized he was wearing a translator device. "I am Instructor Veloth. We are pleased to have representatives from Earth join us." Jake shook the instructor's hand, which felt cool and slightly damp. "Thank you for having us. I'm Commander Jake Peterson, and this is Lieutenant Amy Brooks." Veloth's 4 eyes studied them carefully. There was something in his expression that Jake couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or worry. "I must be honest with you," Veloth said slowly. "This program is very difficult. Many students do not finish it. We have prepared medical facilities and support staff specifically for your arrival." Amy raised an eyebrow. "We appreciate the concern, but we've both been through pretty intense training back home." "I am certain you have," Veloth replied, though he didn't sound convinced. "Please follow me. I will show you the facility." They walked through the academy grounds, and Jake couldn't help but be impressed. The whole place was like a high-tech university campus. There were dozens of buildings, each one more impressive than the last. Students from all over the galaxy walked past them, and Jake saw species he'd only read about in the briefing materials. Some had scales, others had fur. One group looked like they were made entirely of blue crystal. All of them stopped to stare at the humans. "Why is everyone looking at us like that?" Amy asked quietly. Veloth hesitated before answering. "Humans are new to the collective. There has been much discussion about your species. Some are curious. Others are concerned." "Concerned about what?" Jake asked. "Your planet," Veloth said simply. He didn't explain further. They passed by several large dome-shaped buildings. Veloth explained that these were the training facilities, each one designed to simulate different planetary environments. There were control rooms with dozens of monitors, medical centers with equipment Jake didn't recognize, and living quarters that looked more like luxury hotels than military barracks. "Your first class begins tomorrow morning," Veloth told them as they reached their assigned quarters. "It is called Extreme Temperature Survival. We will start with a cold environment challenge." "How cold?" Jake asked. "-10 degrees Celsius, Veloth said. He looked at them as if expecting a reaction. "You will be required to remain in this environment for 2 hours. We have full medical teams standing by." Jake and Amy both tried not to smile. -10 Celsius was about 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Jake had done winter training exercises in Alaska where it got down to 40 below zero. This was going to be easier than expected. "I'm sure we'll manage," Amy said diplomatically. Veloth showed them into their quarters, which were spacious and comfortable. There were 2 bedrooms, a common area with comfortable furniture, and something that looked like a food printer. The instructor explained how everything worked, gave them access codes, and told them to rest. "Tomorrow will be challenging," he said before leaving. When the door closed behind him, Jake and Amy looked at each other and started laughing. "Did he just say -10 is extreme?" Amy said, dropping her bag on the couch. "He looked so serious about it too," Jake replied. He walked over to the window and looked out at the academy grounds. The suns were setting now, painting everything in shades of orange and pink. This is either going to be the easiest training we've ever done or we're missing something. Amy came to stand beside him. Maybe their definition of extreme is different from ours. Maybe, Jake agreed. Or maybe Earth is just tougher than other planets. They spent the rest of the evening exploring their quarters and trying out the food synthesizer, which could apparently make meals from any planet in the collective. Jake ordered something that was supposed to be similar to pizza. It tasted like mushrooms and cinnamon, which was definitely not right. Amy had better luck with a dish that reminded her of chicken curry. Later, as Jake was getting ready for bed, he pulled up information about the academy on the room's computer system. It had been training survival specialists for over 200 years. The graduation rate was only about 40%. Students came from hundreds of different planets to learn how to survive in extreme conditions. He read through the course descriptions. Extreme temperature survival, hostile atmosphere management, predator avoidance, emergency shelter construction, high gravity adaptation. They all sounded reasonable enough, but something about the way they were described made them seem more dramatic than they probably were. The entry on extreme temperature survival caught his eye. It said that the course would expose students to temperatures that could cause severe injury or death without proper preparation. It mentioned that species from tropical planets often struggled the most. There were statistics about how many students needed medical intervention during the cold challenges. Jake closed the computer and lay back on his bed. Tomorrow would be interesting, that much was certain. He and Amy were about to find out just how different humans were from the rest of the galaxy. As he drifted off to sleep, he thought about all the places he'd been on Earth. The freezing mountains of Afghanistan, the scorching deserts of the Middle East, the humid jungles of South America. Every one of those places had tried to kill him in its own way, and he'd survived them all. How hard could an alien training course be? Outside, the stars were coming out, thousands of them visible in Zenara 7's clear night sky. Somewhere out there was Earth, a little blue planet that most of the galaxy apparently viewed with concern. Jake didn't know it yet, but he and Amy were about to teach the collective why that concern was justified. Not because humans were dangerous, but because they came from a world that made the Academy's extreme training look like a pleasant afternoon. Part 2, the alarm went off at 6 in the morning. Jake was already awake, sitting on his bed and going through some basic stretches. Amy emerged from her room looking alert and ready. They both dressed in the Academy uniforms that had been provided, simple gray suits made from some kind of synthetic material that was supposed to offer minimal thermal protection. The walk to the training dome took about 10 minutes. Other students were heading the same direction, and Jake noticed how nervous they looked. Some were walking in groups, talking in low voices. Others walked alone, their faces showing clear anxiety. One student, who looked like a large insect with multiple legs, was doing some kind of breathing exercise as it walked. The extreme temperature survival dome was massive, easily 3 stories tall and wide enough to fit a football field inside. When Jake and Amy entered, they found about 30 other students already there, along with Instructor Veloth and what looked like 2 complete medical teams. The medical staff had equipment set up along one wall, and there were monitors displaying vital signs for each student. Veloth stood at the front of the group. Good morning. Today we begin your training with cold exposure. The temperature inside the simulation chamber will drop to -10 degrees Celsius. You will remain inside for 2 hours. Your suits provide minimal protection, enough to prevent immediate death but not comfort. Jake glanced at Amy. The suits they were wearing felt like light jackets. For -10 Celsius, this was actually pretty reasonable. The purpose of this exercise, Veloth continued, is to teach you mental discipline and body adaptation techniques. Students from warmer planets often find this very difficult. Remember, there is no shame in calling for help. Medical teams are ready to extract anyone who reaches dangerous levels. The lights in the dome dimmed and Jake felt the temperature start to drop. It was gradual at first, like someone had turned on air conditioning. Around him, the other students were settling into various positions. Some sat cross-legged on the floor, others stood with their eyes closed. The insect-like students' movements were already getting slower. Within 10 minutes, Jake could see his breath in the air. The temperature was probably around 40 degrees now. It felt like a cool autumn day. He looked over at Amy, who shrugged. This was nothing compared to what they'd experienced during winter training. But the other students were clearly struggling. The one closest to Jake was shivering, his whole body trembling. Another student, a mammalian creature with reddish fur, had its arms wrapped tightly around itself. Its teeth were chattering so hard that Jake could hear it from several feet away. 20 minutes into the exercise, a voice called out, "I need help." It was one of the students near the back. The medical teams moved quickly, wrapping the student in what looked like a metallic blanket and checking its temperature with handheld devices. They escorted it out of the dome. Then another student called for help. Then a third. Veloth was watching a bank of monitors that displayed everyone's vital signs. His 4 eyes kept moving between the screens and the students in the dome. Jake noticed that the instructor kept looking at him and Amy with an expression of confusion. Humans. Veloth's voice echoed through the dome. "Are your suits working correctly? Your readings suggest you are not experiencing full exposure to the environment." Jake looked down at his suit. It felt fine. He was a little cold, but nothing serious. "The suit's working fine, sir. It's just a bit chilly." "Chilly," Veloth repeated the word slowly. "You are currently exposed to temperatures that cause severe hypothermia in most species within 30 minutes, and you describe it as chilly." Amy spoke up. "Sir, with respect, this is warmer than a lot of places on Earth. Where I grew up, winter temperatures regularly hit -20 or 30 Celsius. This is uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous." There was a moment of stunned silence in the dome. Then the students, who were still conscious enough to pay attention, started murmuring to each other. One of them, the furry mammalian creature, managed to speak despite its shivering. "Your planet gets this cold naturally?" it asked. "And people live there?" "Millions of people," Jake confirmed. "Some places get even colder. My grandfather lived in a place called Minnesota. Winter temperatures there could hit -40. People just dress warm and go about their business." Another student had to be extracted. Then 2 more. The medical teams were busy now, constantly moving between the remaining students and checking their conditions. Some students were turning colors that Jake was pretty sure weren't normal for their species. Jake and Amy, meanwhile, were fine. Jake had started doing some light exercises to keep his blood moving. Amy was standing still with her arms crossed, looking like she was waiting for a bus. Neither of them showed any signs of distress. At the 1-hour mark, more than half the class had been extracted. The students who remained looked terrible. They were shivering violently, their movements uncoordinated. One looked like it might pass out at any moment. Veloth kept staring at the monitors showing Jake and Amy's vital signs. Their core body temperatures had dropped slightly, but they were still well within safe ranges. Their heart rates were barely elevated. By every measure the monitors could track, the humans were only mildly uncomfortable. "This is not possible," Veloth muttered, loud enough for Jake to hear. "The database said Earth was cold in some regions, but I did not think it meant like this." "Earth has a lot of different climates," Amy explained. She had to raise her voice because her teeth were starting to chatter a little. "We have hot deserts, frozen tundras, tropical jungles, everything." Humans evolved to handle variety. By the 90-minute mark, only 7 students remained in the dome. 5 of them looked like they were holding on through sheer willpower alone. One was lying on the floor, curled into a ball. Another was swaying slightly, its eyes glazed over. Jake and Amy were still standing normally. Jake's fingers were getting a bit numb, and Amy's face was red from the cold, but neither of them were in any real danger. This was just uncomfortable, nothing more. When the 2-hour mark finally came, the temperature started to rise again. The remaining students sagged with relief. Medical teams rushed in to check everyone, wrapping them in heating blankets and offering warm drinks. A medic approached Jake and Amy with a scanning device. He ran it over both of them, checked the readings, ran it again, then looked at them with an expression of disbelief. "Your body temperature is only down 2 degrees, the medic said. 2 degrees. Most students drop 6 to 8 degrees in this exercise. We're good at keeping warm," Amy said with a slight smile. Veloth approached them as the dome emptied out. The other students were being helped out by medical staff, most of them looking exhausted and traumatized. The instructor's silvery skin had taken on a darker shade. "I need to ask you something," Veloth said quietly. "You said this temperature is normal on Earth. How normal?" Jake thought about it. "I mean, it's cold but not unusual. When I was a kid, we'd have days like this in winter. We'd still go outside and play, build snowmen, have snowball fights, that kind of thing." "Snowmen?" Veloth asked. "You make sculptures out of frozen water," Amy explained. "For fun. For fun, Veloth repeated. He looked like someone had just told him that humans ate rocks as a hobby. You play outside in these temperatures. As children, sure, Jake said. I mean, you dress warm, but yeah, it's just winter. Veloth was quiet for a long moment. I think I am beginning to understand something about your species. Something that the collective may have overlooked when we made contact with humanity. What's that? Amy asked. That perhaps Earth is not what we thought it was, Veloth said slowly. We were told your planet had challenging conditions in some regions. But challenge and extreme are different things. What we consider extreme, you consider normal. That suggests your planet is far more hostile than our records indicate. He paused, then continued. Tomorrow we have heat tolerance training. Standard procedure is 40 degrees Celsius for 90 minutes. But for you two, I think we will need different parameters. Jake and Amy exchanged glances. 40 degrees Celsius was about 104 Fahrenheit. That was hot, definitely, but nothing they hadn't experienced before. What kind of different parameters? Jake asked cautiously. I am not certain yet, Veloth admitted. But I suspect that what breaks most species will barely challenge you. And I think the Academy needs to understand what that means. As they left the dome, Jake noticed the other students watching them. There was no hostility in their stares, just pure amazement. One student approached hesitantly. Is it true what you said? It asked. That children on your planet go outside in this cold? Yes, Amy confirmed. Your species is insane, the student said flatly. Jake laughed. Maybe, but we're still here. That is exactly what concerns me, the student replied before walking away. Part 3 news traveled fast at the Academy. By the time Jake and Amy arrived at the heat tolerance training the next morning, there was a crowd. The observation deck above the thermal dome was packed with instructors and advanced students, all wanting to see the humans who had treated freezing temperatures like a mild inconvenience. The class assembled in the main area of the dome. Jake recognized some faces from yesterday, including the furry mammalian student who had barely survived the cold test. Everyone looked nervous, but they were looking at Jake and Amy with something that might have been respect. Or maybe fear. It was hard to tell. Veloth stood at the front with 3 medical teams this time instead of 2. Several other senior instructors stood behind him, clearly there to observe. Jake noticed that part of the dome had been sectioned off with transparent panels, creating a separate chamber. Today we practice heat tolerance, Veloth announced. For most students, the parameters remain standard. 40 degrees Celsius for 90 minutes. However, we have created a modified environment for our human participants. He gestured toward the separate chamber. Commander Peterson and Lieutenant Brooks will experience enhanced conditions. We will begin at standard levels and gradually increase to 70 degrees Celsius. There was a collective gasp from the other students. 70 degrees Celsius was 158 Fahrenheit. Jake had been in the Mojave Desert in summer, where ground temperatures got even hotter than that, but air temperature was different. This would actually be a challenge. We will monitor you closely, Veloth said, looking directly at Jake and Amy. If at any point your vital signs become concerning, we will stop the exercise immediately. The class began. In the main dome, students settled into meditation poses as the temperature started to rise. Jake and Amy entered their separate chamber and sat down on the floor. Through the transparent wall, they could see the other students and the banks of monitors displaying everyone's vital signs. At 20 degrees, it felt like a warm summer day. At 30, it was getting uncomfortable. The other students in the main dome were already looking miserable, even though their temperature was only going to 40. At 40 degrees, Amy pulled off her jacket. Okay, this is starting to feel like actual heat, Jake nodded. He was sweating now, which was good. Sweating meant his body's cooling system was working, like a really hot day in Arizona. Through the wall, they could see one of the instructors talking into a communication device. A moment later, Veloth's voice came through a speaker in their chamber. You are at 40 degrees Celsius. This is already beyond what 90% of species can survive for extended periods. How are you feeling? Hot, Jake admitted, but manageable. We're designed for this kind of thing. Designed? Another instructor's voice cut in. What do you mean? Amy answered this time. Humans evolved as pursuit predators. We used to hunt by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. That required running in intense heat for hours. Our bodies developed really efficient cooling systems to handle it. You hunted by running prey to death? The instructor sounded horrified. In heat like this? Sometimes worse heat than this, Jake confirmed. The African savanna, where humans first evolved, regularly gets above 40 degrees. The temperature in the human chamber continued to rise. 50 degrees, 55, 60. Jake and Amy were both sweating heavily now, their uniforms soaked through. This was genuinely difficult. They stopped talking, focusing on breathing slowly and staying calm. In the main dome, students were dropping out. The 40-degree heat was overwhelming for species evolved on cooler planets. Medical teams moved efficiently, providing cooling treatments and checking for heat stroke. By 30 minutes, half the class had withdrawn. At 65 degrees with 45 minutes remaining, Jake felt like he was in a sauna. A really intense sauna. His heart rate was elevated and he could feel the heat radiating through his entire body. Beside him, Amy's face was bright red, but she was still conscious and alert. Your cooling system is remarkable. Veloth's voice came through the speaker. He sounded genuinely awed. Most species would be experiencing organ failure at these temperatures. Your bodies are maintaining function through perspiration alone. Humans can produce up to 2 liters of sweat per hour, Amy explained between careful breaths. It's one of our best evolutionary advantages. Evaporative cooling, 2 liters per hour. An instructor Jake hadn't heard before spoke up. That seems excessive. It kept our ancestors alive, Jake said. On Earth, the ability to cool yourself efficiently is the difference between life and death in many regions. The temperature hit 70 degrees. This was the hardest thing Jake had done in a while. Every breath felt like it was burning his lungs. His vision was starting to blur slightly at the edges. Beside him, Amy had closed her eyes, her whole body focused on just maintaining function. Through the transparent wall, they could see the main dome. Only 3 students remained at 40 degrees and all 3 looked ready to collapse. The monitors showed their vital signs in concerning ranges. In contrast, Jake and Amy's signs were elevated but stable, stressed but not critical. Veloth was staring at the monitors with an expression of disbelief. The other instructors were gathered around him, all of them watching the human vital signs with fascination. 15 minutes remaining, Veloth announced. Humans, you are doing extraordinarily well. Better than we thought possible. Jake didn't respond. He was too focused on breathing and staying conscious. This was like the worst parts of desert training, compressed into a small room with no escape. But he'd survived worse. They both had. When the timer finally hit 90 minutes, the temperature began to drop. Jake and Amy sat perfectly still, letting their bodies adjust gradually. Rapid cooling after extreme heat could be dangerous. They knew that from experience. Medical teams entered the chamber immediately, scanning them with various instruments. The lead medic, a being with 6 arms and compound eyes, looked at the readings and shook his head in amazement. Your core temperature is elevated 3 degrees, he said. 3 degrees. Most species would be dead. You are merely exhausted. We're good at not dying, Amy said with a weak smile. They were given water with electrolytes and helped out of the chamber. As they emerged, the other students stared at them with open amazement. One student approached, the same one who had called humans insane yesterday. You did that willingly, it said. You subjected yourself to that heat by choice. It's part of training, Jake replied, drinking his water slowly. But you said humans do this for recreation, the student pressed. You called it a sauna. Traditional saunas can get even hotter, Amy confirmed. 80 or 90 degrees Celsius. People sit in them to relax. Relax, the student repeated. Your species sits in near-lethal temperatures to relax. It's good for you, Jake said. Opens up the pores, helps with circulation. The student walked away, muttering something in its own language that the translators didn't pick up. Jake suspected it wasn't complimentary. Veloth approached them, his silvery skin now a deep gray color. I need to show you something, he said quietly. Both of you. It is important. What is it? Amy asked. Information about Earth, Veloth said. Information that perhaps you should have been told before coming here. Follow me, please. They followed the instructor out of the dome and through the academy grounds. Other students and staff members watched them pass, whispering to each other. Jake was starting to feel uncomfortable with all the attention. Veloth led them to the administration building, through several security checkpoints, and into a room filled with computer terminals and holographic displays. He sat down at one terminal and began typing. What I am about to show you is not classified information, Veloth explained, but it is sensitive. Earth's classification within the collective database has been a subject of much debate. He pulled up a file on the holographic display. Jake and Amy leaned forward to read it. At the top, in large letters, was a designation neither of them had seen before. Planet. Earth. Classification. Class 12. Deathworld. Deathworld? Jake read aloud. What does that mean? Veloth pulled up more information. The collective classifies planets on a scale from Class 1 to Class 12. Class 1 planets are essentially sterile, with no dangerous conditions. Class 12 planets are so hostile that colonization or visitation requires extreme protective measures. He looked at them seriously. There are only 47 Class 12 worlds known in the explored galaxy. Earth is one of them. Amy stared at the screen. You're saying our planet is considered one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy? Not just one of them, Veloth said quietly. According to this data, Earth may be the most hostile habitable world ever discovered. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Suddenly, the reactions from the other students made sense. The medical teams on standby. The concern in Veloth's voice. They weren't just worried about humans. They were worried about what kind of planet could produce humans. I think you need to see the full report, Veloth said, pulling up more data. It explains much about why you found our extreme training so manageable. As Jake and Amy read through Earth's classification report, they began to understand just how different their home planet really was, and why the galaxy had been so hesitant to welcome humanity into. Part 4, the holographic display showed page after page of data about Earth. Jake and Amy read in silence, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to something close to disbelief. Veloth stood quietly beside them, letting them process what they were seeing. The report was detailed and thorough. It started with atmospheric composition. Earth's atmosphere contained 21% oxygen, which the report flagged as dangerously high. Most habitable planets had oxygen levels between 8 and 12%. Higher concentrations were considered corrosive and posed serious fire hazards. Wait, Amy said, pointing at the screen. They think our air is dangerous? For most species, yes, Veloth confirmed. High oxygen environments are extremely reactive. They accelerate aging, increase cancer risk, and make fires burn much more intensely. Most species require protective breathing equipment on high oxygen worlds. Jake thought about that. But humans evolved in this atmosphere. We need this much oxygen. Exactly, Veloth said, which suggests your species adapted to survive in conditions most would consider toxic. The report continued. Temperature ranges on Earth varied from negative 89 degrees Celsius at the poles to positive 57 degrees in desert regions. The report noted this as extreme variability. Most stable habitable planets had temperature ranges of maybe 20 degrees across their entire surface. Weather patterns were next. The report described hurricanes, tornadoes, monsoons, and electrical storms, with what Jake could only describe as horror. Wind speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour had been recorded. Electrical storms that produced billions of volts of energy. Rainfall so heavy it could erode solid rock over time. Your planet has weather systems capable of destroying cities, Veloth said quietly. On most worlds, weather is gentle, predictable. On Earth, it kills thousands of people every year despite your technology. Amy scrolled down to the section on seismic activity. Earth's tectonic plates were constantly moving, causing frequent earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The report counted over 1,500 active volcanoes and estimated that a significant earthquake occurred somewhere on the planet every 11 seconds. You built cities on the slopes of active volcanoes, Veloth pointed out. The collective considers that insane, but humans do it regularly. We don't have much choice, Jake said. Earth is geologically active. You either learn to live with it or you don't live anywhere. The next section was titled Biological Hazards, and it was the longest part of the report. Earth contained an estimated 8 million species, including countless microorganisms. Many were pathogenic, capable of causing disease. The report noted that humans had developed complex immune systems just to survive daily exposure to these organisms. Then, there were the predators. The report listed dozens of species that actively hunted humans or were capable of killing them. Sharks, crocodiles, bears, lions, tigers, wolves, leopards. The list went on. There were also sections on venomous and poisonous species. Snakes, Spiders, scorpions, jellyfish, certain frogs, even some plants. Every major region of your planet contains species capable of killing humans, Veloth said. In the water, on land, in the air. This is virtually unknown on other habitable worlds. Most planets have perhaps a handful of dangerous predators, confined to specific areas. On Earth, they are everywhere. Amy was staring at a picture of a great white shark. We learn to swim in oceans full of these things. Yes, Veloth said, which the collective finds remarkable. Most species avoid any water containing large predators. Humans swim recreationally in such waters. Jake scrolled to a section on radiation exposure. Earth's surface was constantly bombarded with ultraviolet radiation from its sun. The planet's magnetic field provided some protection, but it fluctuated, allowing dangerous radiation spikes. Prolonged exposure caused cancer and other health problems. You go outside without protection, Veloth said. You expose yourselves to radiation that would require protective gear on most worlds. And you do this every day. The report included a historical section. Earth had experienced 5 major extinction events, periods where more than 75% of all species died. The most recent was 65 million years ago. Each time, life had returned, often more aggressive and adaptable than before. Your planet has tried to kill all life on it multiple times, Veloth said, and life survived every time. That kind of evolutionary pressure creates species unlike those found anywhere else. There was a section specifically about humans. It noted that humans evolved as persistence predators, hunting by running prey to exhaustion over long distances. This required exceptional endurance and heat tolerance. Humans could run for hours in conditions that would kill most species within minutes. The report also noted human social behavior. Humans formed complex groups, used tools, and adapted to virtually every environment on their planet. They lived in deserts where water was scarce, in polar regions where temperatures were lethal, in jungles filled with diseases and predators on the slopes of volcanoes, and in areas prone to earthquakes and floods. You are generalists, Veloth explained. Most species evolved to fit specific environmental niches. Humans evolved to survive anywhere. That is why you found our training so manageable. We were testing you against conditions your species considers normal. Jake sat back, trying to process everything. So when first contact happened, the collective saw us as dangerous. Not exactly, Veloth said carefully. There were 2 concerns. First, that humans might be too aggressive, shaped by your hostile world into something violent. Second, that you might be too fragile outside your environment, unable to adapt to normal planetary conditions. The second concern seems wrong, Amy observed. Very wrong, Veloth agreed. If anything, you are too well adapted. You find normal conditions boring, comfortable, unchallenging. He pulled up another file, this one showing statistics on collective personnel in frontier exploration. In recent years, survival rates have been declining in frontier operations. We assumed our training was sufficient. Now I understand it was not. We have been training people for normal worlds. But the frontier is not normal. It is hostile. It requires the kind of mindset that only Deathworlders possess. Deathworlders, Jake repeated. That's what you call us? It is what you are, Veloth said simply. Beings who evolved on planets that actively try to kill them. It shapes everything about you. Your psychology, your physiology, your culture. You are built for survival in ways we never considered. Amy was quiet for a moment. Is that why the Academy invited us? To see what Deathworlders can do? Partly, Veloth admitted. But also because we need to learn from you. The collective has been expanding into more hostile regions of space. We need people who can survive there. We need people who think like you do. He closed the files and turned to face them directly. Which brings me to a proposal. The Academy director wants to meet with you. We want to create a new training program based on Earth protocols, and we want you to design it. Jake and Amy looked at each other. Us, Jake said. We're not instructors. You're experts, Veloth countered. You possess knowledge that we desperately need. How to survive in truly hostile conditions. How to maintain mental discipline when your environment is trying to kill you. How to push past what you think are your limits. We just learned how to survive on Earth, Amy said. That's all. Exactly, Veloth said. And Earth is the most dangerous planet we know of. If you can teach others even a fraction of what humans know instinctively, it would revolutionize our survival training. He pulled up a proposed course outline. It was ambitious. 12 weeks intensive training, covering everything from temperature extremes to hostile atmospheres to predator awareness. All based on human survival techniques. Think about it, Veloth said. The collective has much to learn from humanity. You could be the ones to teach us. Jake looked at Amy. She was studying the course outline with interest. It would be challenging, she said slowly. Teaching aliens to think like humans. But interesting, Jake added, and probably useful. If they're really going into hostile territory, they need better preparation than what they're getting now. Veloth waited patiently. Finally, Jake nodded. Okay, we'll do it. But we design it our way. If you want us to teach human survival methods, we do it properly. Agreed, Veloth said immediately. You will have full authority over the curriculum design. Within safety parameters, of course. Define safety parameters, Amy said with a slight smile. Nothing that causes permanent injury or death, Veloth replied. Beyond that, you have discretion. Jake thought about some of the survival training he'd been through in the military. This is going to be eye-opening for your students. That is exactly what we need, Veloth said. The collective has become comfortable, complacent. We need to remember that the universe is not safe, and we need people who can teach us how to survive it. As they left the archive room, Jake felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride that humans had something valuable to offer the galaxy, concern about what teaching aliens Earth-style survival would actually involve, and curiosity about how beings from normal worlds would handle training designed for a Deathworld species. You realize this is going to be hard on them, Amy said as they walked back through the academy grounds. We're going to push them. Part 5. 2 weeks later, Jake and Amy stood in front of their first class. The training hall was large and open, with holographic displays showing various Earth environments behind them. Mountains covered in snow, dense jungles, vast deserts, frozen tundras. Each image was carefully chosen to show the variety of conditions humans considered normal. 15 students sat in front of them, representing 12 different species. All were volunteers. All had completed the standard academy survival course and were considered advanced specialists by collective standards. But they looked nervous. They had heard what happened during the temperature tests. They knew they were about to face something different. Jake and Amy wore Earth military fatigues instead of academy uniforms. It was a deliberate choice. This was going to be human training, not collective training. They needed to set the tone from the start. Welcome, Jake began. Over the next 12 weeks, you're going to learn how humans survive. Not how we survive on your planets, but how we survive on Earth. By the end of this course, you'll handle conditions that would have sent you to medical treatment before. I'm not going to pretend this will be easy, Amy continued. It won't be. There will be times when you want to quit. Times when you think you can't go on. But if you push through, you'll leave here as better survival specialists than you ever imagined possible. One of the students raised a limb. It was Crete, the mammalian who had barely survived the cold test weeks ago. Will we really train in conditions like Earth? Yes, Jake confirmed. We'll start with basics. Body temperature regulation without technology, finding and purifying water, identifying and responding to danger. Then we'll move to environmental challenges, cold, heat, altitude, atmospheric pressure variations. But we're going to teach you something more important than techniques, Amy said. We're going to teach you the mindset. On Earth, we have a saying, adapt or die. That's not philosophy. That's literal truth on a death world. You're going to learn to think like someone whose environment is actively trying to kill them. Another student spoke up, a reptilian being with blue scales. Why would we want to think that way? Our home planets are safe. Because the frontier isn't safe, Jake replied. Every unexplored planet is potentially hostile. Every system could have dangers you've never encountered. Right now you think of extreme conditions as emergencies. We're going to teach you to think of them as normal, so when you face a real emergency, you don't panic. Veloth was observing from the back of the hall along with several other instructors and the academy director. He nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of training the collective needed. We start tomorrow at dawn, Amy announced. Dress for cold weather by your standards. We're beginning with what humans call a morning run. How cold? Crete asked nervously. 5 degrees Celsius, Jake said. A nice spring day. The students exchanged worried glances. 5 degrees was cold by their standards, but after seeing what humans considered extreme, they weren't sure what to expect anymore. The next morning came early. Jake and Amy were waiting at the running track when the students arrived, most of them bundled in heavy thermal clothing. The temperature was exactly 5 degrees and there was a light wind that made it feel colder. "Form up," Jake called out. "We're going to run 5 kilometers. That's about 3 miles. We'll maintain a steady pace. If you need to stop, stop, but try to keep moving." The run was brutal for the students. Most had never run more than a kilometer at a time, and certainly not in cold weather. Within 10 minutes, several were falling behind. By the halfway point, some were walking, but none quit completely. They kept moving even when their bodies screamed at them to stop. Jake and Amy ran with them, offering encouragement and advice. "Control your breathing. Keep your core warm. Your body will adapt if you let it." When they finally finished, the students collapsed on the ground, exhausted and shivering. But there was something different in their expressions. Pride, maybe. They had done something they didn't think they could do. "Good work," Amy said. "Tomorrow we do it again. Same time, same distance. It'll be easier." Over the following days, the course intensified. They learned to build shelters using only natural materials, to start fires without modern tools, to navigate by stars and landmarks instead of electronic devices, to find water sources and make them safe to drink. Every lesson was practical. Jake and Amy didn't believe in theoretical knowledge. They threw students into situations and made them figure out solutions. It was frustrating and exhausting and sometimes demoralizing, but it was effective. 1 week in, they moved to wilderness survival. Students were taken to a simulated forest environment and given minimal supplies. They had to survive for 48 hours using only what they could find or make. The first few hours were chaotic. Students accustomed to technology and comfort struggled with basic tasks. Building a fire took one group 4 hours. Finding clean water proved nearly impossible for another. One student tried to eat a plant that Jake quickly identified as toxic, but slowly they learned. They watched how Jake and Amy moved through the environment with confidence, always aware of their surroundings, always thinking 3 steps ahead. They learned to notice details, which plants were safe, where water collected, how to read animal tracks. By the second night, most groups had functioning camps. They had fire, shelter, and water. They were cold and hungry and uncomfortable, but they were alive. More importantly, they were thinking differently. Instead of panicking about the lack of technology, they were solving problems. Week 3 brought temperature training. Not the simple tests from before, but extended exposure combined with physical activity. Students ran in negative 15-degree weather. They performed tasks in 45-degree heat. They learned what their bodies could actually endure when pushed. Crete, the mammalian who had struggled so much initially, surprised everyone. He adapted quickly, his natural fur providing insulation once he learned to manage his body heat properly. By week 4, he was volunteering for the hardest challenges. Week 5 introduced altitude training. The simulation chambers could reduce air pressure, mimicking high-altitude environments. Students learned to function with less oxygen, to recognize the signs of altitude sickness, to pace themselves in thin air. This was particularly hard for species from dense atmosphere planets. One student, a being that looked like a walking plant, nearly failed this section. But Amy worked with them individually, teaching breathing techniques and mental discipline. By the end of the week, they were functioning at pressures that would have been impossible before. Week 7 brought predator awareness training. Jake and Amy introduced students to recordings and simulations of Earth's predators. They taught threat assessment, escape strategies, and defensive techniques. "Most planets don't have apex predators," Jake explained. "Earth has dozens. You need to know how to recognize danger and respond appropriately." The students watched footage of lions hunting, sharks circling prey, bears protecting territory. For many, this was their first real exposure to creatures that viewed other beings as food. It was terrifying but educational. "The key is not to panic," Amy said. "Predators react to fear. You stay calm, assess the situation, and respond intelligently. Sometimes that means fighting. Sometimes it means running. Sometimes it means staying perfectly still. You have to know which." They practiced scenarios with holographic predators. Students learned to move through dangerous terrain while staying aware of threats. They learned to identify safe routes and recognize hunting patterns. Several students discovered they were actually good at this once they got past their initial fear. By week 9, the students looked different. They moved with more confidence. Their bodies were leaner and stronger. They didn't complain about discomfort anymore. They had learned that discomfort was temporary and manageable. Week 10 brought integration training. Everything they had learned was combined into complex scenarios. Students were dropped into hostile environments with multiple challenges: cold weather plus predators, high heat plus limited water, thin atmosphere plus physical demands. They worked in teams, supporting each other using every technique they'd learned. Jake and Amy observed from a distance, intervening only when absolutely necessary. Most of the time they didn't need to. The students had learned to think for themselves. One scenario particularly impressed Jake. A team found themselves in a simulated canyon system during a flash flood. They had minutes to reach high ground. Instead of panicking, they worked together. Using rope techniques Amy had taught them to climb quickly and efficiently, they all survived. Week 11 was psychological endurance. Students were placed in isolation for extended periods, forced to manage boredom, loneliness, and stress without external support. This broke some of them temporarily, but with guidance they learned that mental strength was just as important as physical capability. Week 12 was the final test. Each student faced a comprehensive survival scenario alone. 48 hours in a hostile environment with minimal supplies. They would face cold, heat predators, and resource scarcity. Everything they'd learned would be tested. Jake and Amy watched the monitors as students worked through their scenarios. Some struggled, some excelled, but all of them showed skills.